Vanished Without a Trace by Sarah Hamaker. A missing person case, a new clue, and a fight for survival. After 9 years searching for his missing sister, attorney Henderson Parker uncovers a clue that leads him to Twin Oaks, Virginia, and podcaster Elle Updike investigating the case. Partnering with the journalist is the last thing Henderson wants, until mysterious thugs make multiple attacks on both their lives. Now they'll have to trust each other before the suspected kidnappers make them disappear for good. Now an excerpt from Vanished Without a Trace by Sarah Hamaker. Henderson Parker stapled the last flyer onto a telephone pole on the outskirts of Twin Oaks. Helena's lovely face stared back at him, the mischief in her brown eyes conjuring up memories of playing hide-and-seek on Martha's Vineyard in the summer and building snow forts in the winter. Helena had been born 3 months after his adoption, the two of them growing up like twins. Her disappearance weighed heavily on his shoulders. If only he'd paid more attention to her, maybe he would have a clue as to her whereabouts. For 9 years, he'd tracked down every lead, no matter how slim, in the hope it would lead to his sister, who he'd last seen in their hometown of Buffalo, New York, outside the courthouse. Even now, he could picture her sassy wave as she slipped into a friend's van and been driven away. Because Helena often went weeks without contact with her family, it had been nearly 6 months before they realized she had vanished. By the time Henderson had begun asking questions as to where she'd gone, the trail had grown cold. Trudging back to his vehicle, he climbed in and cranked the engine. Deciding to let the AC cool off the interior before driving back to the B&B, he pulled out the photo that had driven him to Virginia. Like most small-town papers, the Twin Oaks Gazette featured the life and events of its residents. In the July 20th edition, pictures of the town's annual Christmas in July parade graced the front page and an inside spread. One of the crowd pictures had a woman with her face half turned from the camera. The resemblance to Helena was unmistakable. His first glimmer of hope in 9 long years. Arriving in Twin Oaks 2 days ago, he'd shown Helena's picture all around town, but no one had seen anyone who resembled her. He also looked over the Gazette's photographers' other parade pictures, but could find no others with that same woman. Yesterday, he had 1,000 flyers printed and spent the morning putting up half of them all over the town's quaint Main Street, with its variety of shops and restaurants interspersed with City Hall and a U.S. Post Office. Drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, he contemplated his next move. Time to go to the county sheriff's department to see if they would open an investigation into Helena's disappearance now that Henderson had proof she could be in Virginia. He put the SUV in gear, then glanced at his grungy attire. No one would take him seriously if he showed up in board shorts and a sweaty t-shirt. Better shower first and change into something more respectable. He headed to Tall Trees B&B. Once inside the federal-style mansion, he bounded up the stairs to his room, which overlooked the back gardens. Fishing in his pocket for his key, the bed and breakfast handed out metal keys instead of plastic key cards, he paused outside the door, noting the latch hadn't fully caught. Maybe the cleaning staff hadn't finished his room yet. Pushing the door open, he stepped inside. At the dresser, a man wearing a baseball cap was rifling through a drawer with gloved hands. "Hey, what are you doing?" Henderson charged the intruder. The man whipped around, his eyes flaring wide above a mask obscuring the lower part of his face. Shoving away from the dresser, the intruder rammed Henderson in a full-body tackle, sending him crashing into the four-poster bed. His head thwacked against one of the bedposts. Before he could recover from the exploding pain, the man punched him hard in the middle, then dashed for the door. Gasping for breath, Henderson pushed to his knees and snagged the man's heel, bringing him down with a satisfying thud. The intruder kicked out with his other foot, catching Henderson's midsection with enough force to loosen his grip. The man scrambled out of the room. Shaking off the pain, Henderson staggered to the door, slumping slightly against the jamb to clear his head, before going after the man. Rounding the stair landing, something hard and wet struck the side of his face, sending him back against the wall. A vase shattered beside him, raining glass and flower stems onto the carpet. The slamming of the front door propelled him to his feet. Henderson raced down the stairs, wrenching the door open. On the paver stone walkway, the masked intruder grappled with a woman, who delivered a well-timed headbutt that aligned the top of her head with the man's nose. Blood soaked his camouflaged neck gaiter. Henderson headed toward the pair as the man growled like a wounded bear, punched the woman in the head, and then spun her directly into Henderson. Catching the woman's arms, Henderson tried to move her aside as gently as he could, but his feet tangled with hers, and the two of them landed hard in the flower bed bordering the walkway. Brushing her hair off his beard, Henderson craned his neck around the woman in time to see the intruder yank a motorbike out of the bushes near the gravel parking lot. Gunning the engine, gravel spewed as the man raced off. Henderson restrained the impulse to smash his fist into something as frustration at losing the intruder roiled inside him. Glaring at the woman still in his grip, his eyes softened. It wasn't her fault she'd foiled the capture. "Sorry about that." Her melodious voice had a familiar tone to it. She squirmed to extract herself from his embrace, her elbow connecting with his ribs in the same place the man's foot had collided. Henderson grunted as pain radiated throughout his body. He rose on his elbows, then rolled her slightly to the side to allow him to sit up. "Now I'm out of range of your elbows." She pushed to a seated position, her back to him. Mulch and broken flowers entwined her brown hair. He plucked a piece out, inadvertently tugging a couple of strands of hair with it. Ouch! Her hand touched her head. She twisted to spear him with eyes the color of a cloudless summer day. Warmth crept up the back of his neck over taking such a liberty with a pretty stranger. "You've got mulch in your hair." "I do?" She finger-combed her hair, sending bits of flour and mulch flying. His body protested rising as new aches made themselves known. Holding out his hand to the woman, he grasped hers and helped extricate her from the flower bed onto the sidewalk. She thanked him, then brushed off the back of her skirt. Who was that guy? Henderson frowned. "I don't know. I found him in my room going through my dresser." Her eyes rounded. "How did he get into your room?" "The locks aren't exactly state-of-the-art." Isabella Stratman, one of the owners of Tall Trees B&B, hurried toward them from across the lawn. "What happened?" A wide-brimmed hat shielded her face, and she carried a basket of cut flowers. "There was an intruder in Mr. Parker's room," the woman volunteered. "He raced away on a motorbike after attacking Mr. Parker and pushing me down." Henderson gaped. How had she known his name? To his knowledge, he'd never met her, although there was something about her voice that niggled the back of his mind. Before he could question her, Isabella spoke. "That's terrible! Did you call 911?" The woman shook her head. "Not yet, but we should report it." She turned to Henderson. I didn't see anything in his hands when he rushed me. Was anything taken? He flashed back to the altercation. I haven't checked, but I can't think where he'd have put it. He was wearing jeans, boots, and a t-shirt. And a baseball cap and one of those neck-face covering things, the woman added. Isabella gave each of them the once-over. You're both hurt. You should go to the town clinic in case you have a concussion. I'm fine. He waved away her concern, although his ribs ached and his head throbbed. I don't understand why he was searching my room. I'm calling the sheriff's office now. Isabella hurried up the stairs and into the house, leaving Henderson and the woman alone. He sucked in a breath and nearly choked as pain flared across his midsection. He touched his face, but the vase hadn't broken the skin. You should get ice on your head. Placing a hand on his side, he pointed to her knees, now oozing blood from multiple lacerations. You look like you could use some medical attention yourself. She glanced down at her legs, a grimace twisting her lips. Yeah, I might at that. Didn't realize I'd scraped them so badly. Guess the adrenaline is wearing off. That was an understatement. His own body sagged and the pounding at the back of his skull ratcheted up a notch. His side ached, but he didn't think his ribs were broken. He'd cracked them playing football in high school and had never forgotten the fiery pain of each breath. You okay? The woman touched his arm, concern evident in her gaze. Yeah, just need some ibuprofen to take care of this monster headache. His hand went to the back of his head, tender from the encounter with the bedpost. I'm sorry you got hurt. It's only some scrapes. He pointed to her face, where redness flared along her temple. You'll probably have a nice bruise later on. Better get some ice on it. Her fingers touched the area. I'm sure Isabella has a cold pack in the freezer. Good thing we're currently the only guests. A smile crossed her face, bringing a sparkle to her blue eyes. It could be awkward explaining our appearance. He took in her rumpled shirt and skirt, bits of mulch clinging to the soft, flowery material. Except for the knees, you don't look so bad. He immediately wanted to bite his tongue. Just what every woman wanted to hear. He'd chase her off before he'd had a chance to get to know her, and he found himself hoping he hadn't because there was something about her that intrigued him. Thanks. A look of unease crossed her face. He'd made her uncomfortable. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's not that. The sparkle in her eyes dimmed. His body tingled with anticipation, as it did whenever he sensed a witness on the stand was about to drop a bombshell he hadn't been expecting. What is it, then? I know who you are, but you don't know who I am. She lowered her gaze. Her statement reminded him of his surprise that she knew his name. He folded his arms, waiting for her to introduce herself. I'm Elle Updike. Her name rang a bell, but it took him a moment to place it. Then disbelief, followed quickly by anger, infused him. You're that podcaster who wanted to do a show on Helena's disappearance. That's right. The confirmation fueled his ire. Her presence now became suspect. Are you following me? No. Well, not exactly. She shifted on the paver stones, still avoiding eye contact. I think you need to explain. That brought her head up to meet his stare. I came to Twin Oaks to chase another lead for the 3rd season of Gone, but... Her voice trailed off. Go on, he prompted. He couldn't believe she had the audacity to try once again to convince him to let her tear Helena's life apart for entertainment. Elle squared her shoulders. I also knew you would be here, following up on a new lead to Helena's whereabouts. He firmed his mouth. Only one place she could have learned that tidbit, but he had to hear it from her lips. How did you know that? Your mother told me. If I find you've been hounding her... The half-finished threat shot out of him like a bullet. From the paleness of her cheeks, it had struck home with the force he'd intended. Your mother chose to keep in touch. She told me about your discovery and trip to Virginia. I see. Anger that Elle would take advantage of his mother's continued grief over losing her daughter, and more recently her husband, rose, but he tamped it down with an effort. He'd learned long ago not to trust journalists, not to give them anything they could twist to their own end. Look at how they painted him as the villain in that case last year involving a popular youth soccer coach who had been abusing his young players, until the overwhelming evidence had pointed to the coach's guilt and eventual conviction. Not to mention how much trash they'd printed about his sister. Mr. Parker, please, let me help you find Helena. Your mom said you have a photo that shows Helena was here a few months ago. He shook his head at her sincerity, ignoring the voice telling him not to overreact. You people don't know when to stop. I do not want your help, nor do I want you to rip my sister's life apart for your listeners' enjoyment. It's not like that. I can help. He dismissed her words with a slash of his hand. Her plea might be genuine, but no way would he allow a journalist to portray his sister in an unflattering light. Stay away from me, Miss Updike, or I'll have you arrested for harassment.